Chapter 17, The Calm Before the Storm. In the days following the gala, life seemed to settle into a gentle rhythm for Grace and Simon. The event had marked a significant turning point in their relationship, and now, with the tension of the evening behind them, they found themselves enjoying the simple pleasures of being together. Grace continued to excel at work, maintaining her reputation as a strong, capable manager. Her colleagues had begun to notice the subtle changes in her demeanor, a softness that hadn't been there before, a quiet joy that seemed to radiate from within. It was as if the weight she had carried for so long had finally started to lift, replaced by the warmth of Simon's love and support. Simon, for his part, was more devoted than ever. He made it a point to be there for Grace in every way he could, whether it was surprising her with lunch at the office or simply being a calming presence during stressful meetings. His affection for her was evident in every gesture, every glance, and it wasn't long before their relationship became the subject of quiet admiration, and a little envy, among their coworkers. But beneath the surface, both Grace and Simon knew that the calm they were enjoying was temporary. The reality of their different worlds hadn't disappeared, and there were still challenges they would need to face, challenges that had the potential to either strengthen their bond or tear them apart. A subtle revelation. One afternoon, Grace found herself alone in her office, going through a stack of paperwork. The sound of a knock at her door pulled her from her concentration, and she looked up to see Simon standing in the doorway, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Got a minute?" he asked, stepping inside. Grace smiled, setting down her pen. "Always. What's on your mind?" Simon took a seat across from her, his gaze serious but tender. "I've been thinking a lot about what's next for us, Grace. The gala was a big step, but I know there are still things we haven't fully addressed." Grace nodded, understanding what he was getting at. "You're talking about your family." "Yeah," Simon admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I want to introduce you to them properly, not just in a social setting like the gala. I want you to know where I come from, the people who shaped my life. But I also want to make sure you're ready for that we're ready for that." Grace felt a flutter of anxiety in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Simon, I've been thinking about that too. I know meeting your family is a big deal, and I'm nervous about it, but I also know that it's important for us to move forward." Simon reached across the desk, taking her hand in his. "I love you, Grace, and I want us to be able to face whatever comes our way. But I also know that once you're part of my world in that way, things will change. The expectations, the scrutiny, it can be overwhelming." Grace squeezed his hand, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of that, Simon. As long as we're together, I know we can handle it." Simon's expression softened, a mix of love and concern in his eyes. "There's something else too. I've been thinking about my place in the family business, what it means for us. I haven't made any decisions yet, but I want you to know that whatever I choose, it'll be with you in mind." Grace felt a surge of emotion at his words. "Thank you, Simon. That means more to me than you know." An unexpected visit. A few days later, Grace was at home, unwinding after a long day at work. The sound of the doorbell ringing pulled her from her thoughts, and she went to answer it, expecting a delivery or perhaps a neighbor. But when she opened the door, she was surprised to see an older woman standing there, elegantly dressed, with a calm yet commanding presence. Grace didn't recognize her at first, but there was something familiar in the woman's eyes. "Grace, I presume?" the woman said, her voice smooth and refined. "Yes, that's me," Grace replied, a hint of confusion in her tone. "Can I help you?" The woman offered a polite smile. "I'm Eleanor Hayes, Simon's mother." Grace felt her breath catch in her throat. Of all the people she had expected to meet, Simon's mother had not been one of them, at least, not like this. She quickly composed herself, stepping aside to let Eleanor in. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Hayes," Grace said, trying to keep her tone steady. "Please, come in." Eleanor walked inside, her movements graceful and deliberate. As Grace led her to the living room, she couldn't help but feel a surge of nerves. This was the woman who had raised Simon, who knew him better than anyone. What would she think of her? How would this encounter go? Once they were seated, Eleanor spoke first, her tone polite but direct. Grace, I wanted to meet you personally before things progress any further between you and Simon. I've heard a great deal about you, and I must say, you've made quite an impression on my son. Grace nodded, unsure of where this conversation was heading. He's very important to me, Mrs. Hayes. I care about him deeply. Eleanor's gaze softened slightly, though her expression remained measured. I can see that. And I can see that he cares for you just as much. But I also know how difficult it can be to navigate a relationship in the context of our family. The expectations, the responsibilities, they can be overwhelming. Grace felt a pang of apprehension, but met Eleanor's gaze with determination. I understand that, and I'm prepared to face whatever challenges come our way. I love Simon, and I want to support him in whatever path he chooses. Eleanor studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words. Then, to Grace's surprise, she smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached her eyes. You're a strong woman, Grace. I can see why Simon is drawn to you. I didn't come here to discourage you, but to offer my support. Our world isn't easy to step into, but I believe you have the strength and character to do so. Relief washed over Grace as she returned the smile. Thank you, Mrs. Hayes. That means a lot to me. Eleanor nodded, her demeanor softening even more. Please, call me Eleanor. And know that I'm here if you ever need guidance or someone to talk to. Simon is my son, and his happiness is what matters most to me. If you're what makes him happy, then you have my full support. Grace felt a wave of gratitude as she reached out to shake Eleanor's hand. Thank you, Eleanor. I appreciate that more than you know. As Eleanor took her leave, Grace felt a renewed sense of confidence. The conversation had been unexpected, but it had also given her a glimpse into the support system she hadn't anticipated. With Simon's family now aware of their relationship, the final pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. The calm before the storm. Later that evening, Grace called Simon to tell him about the unexpected visit. He listened intently, his voice tinged with concern but also relief when Grace told him how well the conversation had gone. I'm glad my mother was supportive, Simon said, his tone thoughtful. She's always been protective of our family, but she also knows how important you are to me. Grace smiled, her heart swelling with affection. I'm glad too. It's starting to feel like everything is falling into place. But even as she said the words, there was a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling that this calm was merely the prelude to something bigger. The challenges they had faced so far had only brought them closer, but what lay ahead might test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. For now, though, Grace chose to focus on the present, on the love she and Simon shared, on the support they had from those who mattered most. Whatever the future held, they would face it together, stronger and more united than ever. As the night settled in, Grace found herself looking forward to the next chapter of their journey. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to embrace it, knowing that she wasn't alone. Thank you for listening. Follow for more stories.